Hi, I'm Chris Bruce. I'm the director of the Museum of Art, and I'm just thrilled you're all here. I couldn't be happier. So thank you for making my evening such a pleasure. At least getting it off to a good start. That's good. It's a real pleasure for us to welcome Jim Olson here tonight. In many ways, you know, this exhibition is kind of a fulfillment of a whole series of exhibitions we've done over the past few years, exploring the sort of intersection between art and architecture. And I just can't think of anyone who is better at doing that than Jim. And so we invited him to do this exhibition. Again, the exhibit is a special opportunity to consider the way architecture showcases art. And, you know, like I said earlier, you know, this is Jim Olson's world, and the rest of us just live in it, I guess. And we're very lucky to be able to do that. He's one of the Northwest's most significant architects. He's a founder of internationally recognized Seattle-based firm Olson Architects, and his practice really takes place at the intersection of art and architecture. I'll let Jim, you know, fill in the blanks, but we're just thrilled that he's here, and look forward to getting behind the architecture with the architect. So, welcome, Jim Olson.
Geez, thank you, Chris. That was great. It's so funny because while Chris was thanking everyone, I thought, oh, those are all the same people I was going to thank. But I want to thank Chris Bruce for coming up with the idea of this exhibit, and for the Museum of Art for, you know, kind of backing it up, and they've just been wonderful to work with. I want to thank all of my clients through all these 45 or 50 years for going through the struggle that we all go through to create something special, and also all the artists that I've met over the years, and how much they've added, how much richness and pleasure they've added to my life. It's really significant. Tonight, what I'd like to do is focus what I'm going to say toward the students of WSU. And I want them to hopefully learn something from what I've been through. And what I'm going to do is sort of walk through my life and my career and illustrate sort of how one thing leads to another, how certain things happen to you and they influence things that happen to you later on. And I'd also am going to go into a little bit more detail on a couple of built projects, just so people can see a little bit behind the scenes. And then sort of woven into that, I'd like to hopefully illustrate how sort of how much richness and meaning art can bring into our lives. And in my case, it's through the integration into architecture. So, so here we go. It's about me. It's kind of overwhelming, actually, to be thinking of. I don't like to think about myself. I'd rather think about my clients and what they need. But tonight it's about me. And I grew up in the Northwest, up by Enumclaw. We lived way out in the country, and I spent like 90% of my time outdoors. I hardly ever came inside until it was dark. And in Western Washington, nature surrounds us. And because it surrounds you, I think you get a different perspective than you get, say, over here, where things stand out, seem separately from nature in a way. And things are integrated and tied together. So I sort of grew up thinking about everything affecting everything else and everything tied together. When I wasn't in Enumclaw, I was at our grandparents' summer cottage down on Puget Sound. It's in South Puget Sound, and it's a beautiful place. It's near Long Branch, Washington, and there's a little bay there. And so when I was a kid, all summer long, my whole world revolved around this one little bay. My grandparents had bought the property about 100 years ago, and they came there by boat because there weren't even any roads. They built a little cabin in the woods, cottage, and one of the things that was really special about that cottage is that it looked directly at Mount Rainier. And our house in Enumclaw also looked at Mount Rainier, and as a kid, I grew up with discussions about how Mount Rainier looked, through this window or that window, whether it was perfectly framed. And in this case, they chose a piece of property where Mount Rainier is almost perfectly balanced between two islands, sort of a centerpiece. So aesthetically, it was like a big, big thing for our family and for a lot of their friends. The other thing about Mount Rainier is it represented a very significant symbol to me, because my grandmother had climbed it twice, and in the early 1900s, and she talked about it all the time. But the whole idea of this symbol that we all looked at was also sort of a symbol of accomplishment or a challenge that you could sort of go and climb a mountain. So we always grew up with this kind of looming over us. It was really interesting. As a kid, in school, I wasn't that good at anything much. I was kind of an average student except for art. I was good at art. And I loved to sort of make things. I made rafts and forts in the woods and things like that. But my dad gave me some really interesting and helpful advice. And he said, if you want to be happy in your life, try to make your career out of what you would like to have as a hobby, and then you will always be happy. And I kind of kept that thought, and I thought, okay, I'll either be an artist or an architect, because I love to make things and I love to draw. So the years went on, and out at Long Branch, I looked at the rocks and the driftwood, and I got a lot from nature. Loved to collect agates and hold them up to the sun. And so I was really influenced by nature. The clouds that were always moving, how the light was reflected off the water, the beautiful creatures that were like everywhere. And, dragonflies, hummingbirds, eagles, seals, everything. But I love to also venture into the woods. And in those days, and even now, the woods were kind of this beautiful place, but also a dangerous place. And there were critters out there that could hurt you. And I remember that every time we'd go out in the woods, we'd wonder if the bear would, appear from behind a tree, or a cougar would jump down and devour us. So, but I also remember that that risk was kind of a thrill, or something that I actually liked, and it was part of the beauty of the woods, the thrill of risking something to be able to see such beautiful things. And I used to lie on my back in the woods and look up through translucent leaves, and I actually still do this, and notice flowers and how they basically contrast against their background so the bees can see them. And, it's all about survival. But in the woods, I learned a lot of things that later on I would actually realize are parts of how art works, and the idea of dramatic presentation and things like that. When I was in my teens, my aunt had a master architect from the Northwest, Paul Kirk, design a house for her down the beach. And that house just enthralled me. I fell in love with it, the way it felt like it just floated on the land, the straight lines against the vertical lines of the forest. And so basically, I think at that point, I decided it wasn't going to be an artist, it was going to be an architect. And so I grew up, I was in high school, I wanted to be an architect. I was 16 years old when I met Carrie, who was about 19 years old and in college. Carrie was the heiress of the Parker Pen fortune, and she was just a very nice, wonderful person. And I told her I wanted to be an architect, and she said, when you finish school, call me up because I want you to design my house. And I kept that thought with me all the way through college. When I was about 18 and first year in architecture school, my dad gave me $500, which was a lot of money then, and said, go build a bunkhouse in the woods. So I built this little house. It was inspired by the Paul Kirk house down the beach, obviously, but it felt like it belonged in the woods. We didn't cut any trees. It just fit right in, and it was, you know, one of my favorite places to be, and actually still is. During college, I traveled a lot, and for all you students here, all I can say is the more you can travel, doesn't matter where you go, just go someplace that's different from where you are, and you'll see things in a different way. I was lucky to go to Egypt. I loved the monumental columns and how art sort of worked in and out of everything, how the straight lines of the columns worked off the organic lines of the sculptures, the pristine beauty of Greece, the Italian Renaissance and how they, sort of like the Northwest forest, things tied together, landscape, architecture, art, interiors, all kind of became one expression, which is very unusual and didn't happen that much in this country. The cathedrals of France, and the lower slide is Ronchamp by Le Corbusier, and just the thrill of seeing that, I just can't explain how much that meant to me. I had looked at 100 pictures of it, but when I saw it in person, it was just like absolutely overwhelming. And traditional Japan, I think there were two things that were maybe the most important: ancient Egypt and traditional Japan. Ancient Egypt for the power and of the monumentality of the columns and all that, and the integration of art, and traditional Japan as to sort of the sort of more delicate way nature was framed, and art and landscape and architecture were all tied together. I traveled to a number of museums. Carlos Scarpa's on the left, and the Kimball Art Museum on the right became my favorite museum in the whole wide world, and it still is. I think it's amazing the way the light bounces out of a skylight and off of a baffle something like 14 times before it comes down into the room, and it gives this soft glow. And I never forgot that museum, and I began to love museums as much as I love nature. After a year and a half of pestering Ralph Anderson, he finally gave me a job. And to you students, if you have an architect you really want to work for, don't give up. And he gave me a job, and he became probably my most important mentor as to how to put a building together, how to detail, how to work with clients, which was really important. And he had this great sense of humor, and he'd make like jokes out of the terrible problems that were always going on. And so it's sort of how to get through life with a sense of humor and enjoy the sort of the beauty of this artistic profession. And working with Ralph Anderson a lot was this wonderful interior designer, Jean Jungward. She became one of my closest friends. but she was a person who brought sort of high fashion, high style, and European elegance and melted it into this sort of soft Northwest architecture. She knew about working art and architecture and interiors sort of all together. And she was also a force to be reckoned with as a personality. And I have to say I learned as much from her as from any other individual I've ever known. I finished all that, went back to my little bay, and I called up Carrie. And I said, Carrie, I'm ready to do your house. I've finished college and I've had my 3 years of apprenticeship. And Carrie said, great, I just bought the property across the bay from your grandparents, and let's get going. And then she said, I want a white brick house with blue shutters. So after a year of talking back and forth about what she really wanted, which was warmth and a certain sense of tradition and to feel comfortable, Carrie and I, working together, came up with a house that she loved for the rest of her life. And I'm going to talk about Carrie just because she represents every client. Clients have a vision. I have ideas. We put it together. It goes back and forth and back and forth. And when it's finished, it's a little bit of them and a little bit of me. And it's something that wouldn't have happened in any other situation. And Carrie was a tough, hard. She was 6'2", and anyway, she was not the easiest client, but she became one of my closest friends for many, many years. Her house hung out over a cliff, melted with nature. On the inside, we basically focused her house on the nature that surrounds it. So she had a lot of beautiful things, but I wanted her to realize that nature was more important than anything she could ever own. And Carrie loved this house so much. We commissioned Philip Levine, Northwest sculptor, to do door pulls for the front door, and that was the first art commission and art integration into one of my houses. The door pulls are in the exhibit, and there are a bunch of people on bronze pulls that represent all the people that would come and go from her home. I was able to start my own office at this point. I never liked working alone, and so I set up an office with Gordon Walker, who had worked with me at Ralph Anderson's office. Gordon was a great collaborator. We had a wonderful team. You'll notice in the picture on the right, George Suyama is sitting in the back of the room, and this is proof that everything that George does was basically because I taught him. We started a tradition early on, and we still do it, of our office crits. And basically what we do every Thursday is we have wine and food, which gets everybody to come, and we put a project up, and everybody comments. Sometimes the students have the best ideas, but the interchange of ideas is really important. I do that with clients, and I do it with staff, and it's an incredible thing. Back on my little bay in South Puget Sound, there were lots of garden parties and things going on in the summers, and I met new people that might want to be clients. So the ambassador to Iceland had seen Carrie's house and asked me to do a house for him. And so I did a house. I wanted to do a grass roof, and he had been the ambassador to Iceland and loved the idea because they do it there. And so we did this house, which was just a great experience for me. And again, with all of his objects that he had collected around the world, they were there, but Mount Rainier was framed as though it was sort of the most special art piece. The house ended up on the cover of a magazine, which for architects, and I know for artists too, means a lot, because suddenly my little world of South Puget Sound grew and became all of the Northwest region. And so you have to sort of do your work and then tell somebody about it so you can do another one. At this point, I met Catherine, and Catherine in a caftan, excuse me, and we went to Greece for our honeymoon. We got all into the Greek villages, the whitewashed, unified villages, and we went back to Seattle and built this little house in Leschi that was all sort of whitewashed and kind of influenced by the Greek villages. So, and I also think for architects that are here, you need to build something for yourself. It's really important you learn what it's like to be a client. We had lots of friends who were interested in art, and we did a variety of houses at that point for people who incorporated art and their own art and other people's art into the designs. I had another interesting and important opportunity. Jean Jungeward asked me to help her with an office for one of Seattle's major art collectors, Bagley Wright. And so I got to sit there as a little 25-year-old or whatever I was and listen to these great people talk about art and design and put this thing together. And I did all the drawings and came up with some of the ideas, but it was just an amazing opportunity for me. We started incorporating art into our office. There were murals on the walls. And we also started doing some things on our own. We built the Pike and Virginia building basically ourselves. We got a little bit of money together and a bunch of friends to buy units and did the building in the market. Catherine and I lived in this part, and we started collecting art and commissioned a couple of artists to do pieces in our new apartment. Rick Sundberg and I worked on the South Arcade building that came to us basically because we had done the other building. So each time you do something, it means that somebody might hire you to do another one if they like it. And Sheila Klein is an artist in Seattle. She came to me when we were planning that building and said, I want to be your conduit to the art world, and I'd like you to incorporate into the building things done by artists that might just be done sort of regularly. So Ann Gardner did a fountain, another artist did something special to the mailboxes. It went all through the building, and I got very acquainted with a number of artists. Some of them are in this room tonight. And I joined the board of COCA, which is called Center on Contemporary Art. At COCA, we put together the James Turrell show that came to Seattle in the 1980s. And my firm helped Turrell put all the drawings together for the show. So we really learned a lot, of course. And I was so taken by his work that I never got over it. The idea of sculpting light and also of creating out of a small space something that felt like infinite space. It was a very important part in my career. And so I was starting to meet important people. Another important person I met at that point was Tom Kundig. He came to work, this bundle of talent and energy, buzzed into my office and did all these things, and it was amazing. And so Tom, as you all probably know, has had just this huge influence on me and on our firm, and where it's come and where it's going to go from here. I also had the chance to work with Robert Venturi, with others in the firm, on the new Seattle Art Museum, and who got to work on the galleries. So another important person came into my life. And so these people come along. You don't necessarily plan it, but listen to yourself, because some of them are really going to influence you later on. Something very exceptional happened around this period. A couple in Seattle, art collectors, came to me. They had been to my apartment in the Market, and based on that, they asked me to design a new house for them in Seattle to house what is, to me, one of the most significant collections of modern art, certainly in the Northwest, and one of the great ones in the country. And I think that the important part here was that they trusted me before they knew that I could do it. And so it was blind faith. And a lot of architecture and commissions of art are basically going on blind faith. So that is the kind of thing that everybody needs, but you don't get it very often. So based on that, I went right back to the Kimball Art Museum on the left and thought about how much I loved that building, why I loved it, and how somehow it could get me through this particular situation. And so we did a house that was long and narrow, and in the center of it was this spine with light coming in from above, and these comfortable rooms. And in that spine were places where art pieces could be seen one by one. But along the sides of that spine were comfortable rooms where you could feel at home. And so it was a combination of a home and a museum in a way. And another exceptional thing that they did is they hired Terry Hunsinger, who also had never done anything like this before. And so they trusted me, and they trusted Terry Hunsinger. It was a process filled with angst and anxiety, and sometimes rocky, as it had to be. But they gave us breaks in our life that were totally significant, and I will be ever grateful to them. Catherine and I decided to move from the Market to a new place, and because we were getting all wrapped up in these artists, and we wanted to do an apartment that was kind of like the South Arcade building and have artists come into our space. So we talked to friends of ours, Jeffrey Bishop, Nancy Mead. Jeffrey did this fabulous mural that wrapped a room, and we trusted them the way some of my clients had trusted me to do what they thought would be the best thing that they could do. And I have to say that we've never regretted it. We love it more than you can imagine. And we brought some things from the beach with us, little bowls filled with shells. I call these museums in a bowl. It's sort of like anybody with no budget can pick up a bunch of things that they like, put it in a bowl, and they have like a little collection. It's great, and it's very rewarding. People love to come over and they paw through all these things. In the center of our apartment is a space that's all about light. And it's inspired by, James Turrell, and I was like into meditation. It was all about clear consciousness and things like that. We got another artist, Walter White, to do a rainbow. He did this rainbow that moved around this space. So it's all about abstraction. And Gardner did some tiles in the kitchen that Catherine got all into. And so we got into the glass movement in the Northwest. And at that point, John Hauberg, who had started the Pilchuck School, saw our apartment and loved the idea of incorporating art into architecture, and he had us work on this house together. Tom worked on it with me, and it was really a fun process. We incorporated, artists into windows, sinks. Ed Carpenter did this piece in a skylight that when the sun hit it, it sent these radiating sort of beams and patterns down the walls. We got really interested in how Ed Carpenter could work with light. So when St. Mark's Cathedral asked us to do a new west wall for them, we thought of Ed Carpenter, and he helped us with this sort of modern interpretation of a three-dimensional rose window that actually does reflect light in a similar way. And a collector of Chihuly and some of the glass artists of the Northwest asked us to do apartment, and we worked with a glass craftsperson, Peter David, to basically create a whole apartment that was all about glass. Even the bathtub was kind of a piece of glass art. All the time, you know, I never forgot nature, and I've been working inside and outside with space. Some of the spaces were about opening up walls so that you could sort of easily walk from inside to outside. But I came up with this idea of what I call the magic window, and everyone in our office knows what it is. But it's a window that where the edges of the glass are hidden. So when you're inside, you can't tell where the division between you and outside is. And in this case, the ivy is actually on the inside of the glass. I kept experimenting with the Terrell-like ceiling, and this is a house down in Atherton, California. But it's how to create a space that feels like it goes on forever. In the same house, I continued my sort of combination of ancient Egypt, the columns that go forever, and this exquisite, delicate detailing that is done in Japan. Another amazing opportunity presented itself. A couple in Denver had probably our country's finest collection of Spanish colonial art, plus about 4 or 5 other collections, including contemporary ancient Greek artifacts and all kinds of things. But they had already interviewed 50 architects from around the country, and over a period of something like 2 years. And they hired me because I think we got along well. But also, they loved the fact that we lived in Pioneer Square, and their new house was going to be in Denver's historic district, and also that I was so interested in art. And we decided that their house should be somehow inspired by Spanish colonial art, because that's kind of their major collection. And the colors are warm, it's vibrant, and a lot of their contemporary art is too. Catherine and I went to Guatemala to see some of the houses that might have housed some of the pieces from their collection. And downtown historic Denver also has a lot of brick buildings. So we came back thinking that the house should be red. We did a red stone house. They named it the Red House. And it's a house like all the other art collectors' houses that is about them being able to share their love for art with other people. And all of these houses are places where tours from art museums and tours of students and benefits to raise money for the arts take place. So these houses are part civic and part home, but they really are places that are shared with the community in many ways. You walk into the front door of this house down in the center, and you look into a courtyard that's very sort of Latin in feeling. Inside the courtyard are contemporary pieces. You turn to the right, and on this big sort of red wall is a very famous Spanish painting. And that was the inspiration. Paintings like that were the inspiration for many of the Spanish colonial artists. Here you can see some of their varied collections. Pre-Columbian stone sphere, a contemporary sculpture, Ming Dynasty furniture, and this wonderful gold Mayan jewelry in a room that's kind of tucked around behind. There's a little tiny room behind this woman in the red dress. And in that room, there are 2 very significant paintings. On one side is a piece by Bellini from the Italian Renaissance from the 1500s. And on the other side is a Spanish colonial piece. The story is that many of the artists went to Italy to study with the masters like Bellini and Michelangelo and all those people. And then they would go off to the New World where affluent clients would hire them to do paintings for them. So it's really interesting how Europe and the Spanish colonial world were really connected in those days. We walk down a hall along the facing onto the courtyard. From a distance, we see a graphic image. Up close, we see a wonderful collection of little Greek marble antiquities that they've collected. So the idea of seeing something from a distance and it reads it's one thing, seeing it up close, you see something again that's the same thing but from a different perspective. The living room, which Terry Hunsinger did the furniture, is patterned after some of the Spanish colonial townhouses that Catherine and I saw in Guatemala. And at the top of the house is a glass room. And these wonderful pre-Columbian statues stand there. Of course, they can take a lot of light because they don't have to be protected from the sun. And from there, you can see the Rocky Mountains, and you can see downtown Denver, and it's just amazing when it snows. A house in Palm Springs that was inspired by the desert, all about the colors of the desert coming up into the house, a variety of materials that basically recall the desert. The clients had collected 30 little glass tiles by a wonderful glass artist, Dan Daly from Rhode Island. I believe he's from Rhode Island. And we designed a front door that incorporated all of their tiles. From the inside, you see it sort of as a glowing lantern, and from the outside, it does the same thing at night. Terry Hunsinger also did the interiors here, but notice this little sculpture against this wall. It's sort of, composed. Art is art, and it's about itself, but it's also about how you compose it with other things. On the outside, the house, the pools reflect the sky, the house reflects the desert. Another amazing opportunity happened. Clients came to me with one of the great collections of American art from the 20th century in our country, and asked me to do a house that would house it. This is a piece by Edward Hopper, wonderful pieces by Georgia O'Keeffe. These are like some of the best pieces by some of the best artists of the 20th century. Marsden Hartley, a portrait of a German officer, I believe, and a huge, heroic bronze sculpture by Gaston Lachaise. And so what I wanted to do sort of off the bat is look at the collection first. And we put everything in context with one another according to size. And the clients wanted an intimate house that felt like home, but they also wanted to house some large paintings. But fortunately, a lot of the paintings from that period are fairly small in scale and could be intimate. But so we started with the paintings. The paintings did inspire some of the design ideas. Our client also had an idea of having a central sort of public part of the house, a guest wing at one far end and a master bedroom at another far end. Makes a lot of sense if you have space to spread it out. And as far as the architecture, I also thought about, gee, it's a house to house this wonderful art that represents the 20th century. I should think about architecture that represents the 20th century. And I thought about, Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Kahn, and also people from the Northwest like Paul Kirk that had influenced me. So the result was a house that from the outside was very low-key, worked with the trees as almost part of the landscape. Sometimes from some angles the landscape actually frames the house and frames art. And when you enter the house, you see sort of this preview of the art collection, the wonderful bronze sculpture. As you get closer, you see her up closer. You go inside, and there she is standing sort of in all her glory. I'm really interested in historical precedents to architecture, just from what I've seen from, Egypt, Greece, and Italy and all that. And I'm interested in proportions, and I think classical proportions are basically based on the human form. And here's a piece of sculpture that is all about the human form, and those proportions were designed to fit that piece of sculpture, but also for other reasons. And I went way back thinking about the Parthenon and Athena, and I was always fascinated by this wonderful piece of architecture that we all know about, but that actually in its heyday, there was, this is a replica, but there was this great giant sculpture of Athena standing there. So in my mind, or my fantasy maybe, our sculpture is our little 21st century Athena standing in her little personal Parthenon. And how one piece works with the other, this big, tough woman working off of Georgia O'Keeffe's piece, how indoor-outdoor, the ideas from goes way back to my cabin, how you can feel like you're almost outside when you're inside, how Joan Mitchell, was inspired by nature, and here's a house that's about nature partly, but also having the architecture scaled appropriately to the large piece in one case and to a smaller piece in another case. Here we have, notice the lighting in the ceiling, it's all contained in one little trough, so that, most ceilings are all cluttered with all these lights in order to light the art properly. And so we tried to tie it all together. And the colors and materials of the room actually, were meant to be complementary to paintings like this. And little, small, this is a piece, I believe, by Georgia O'Keeffe that's just, a foot wide or something. And little things can become important when you use a sense of drama. And so the idea of putting a very light thing against a dark wall, sort of like the flower in the forest, you really do notice it, and it makes a big difference. And cozy rooms where paintings are there above furniture, and in a sense, they're part of the composition of a room, but unto themselves, they're like a treasure of the world of art. And as my client pointed out to me several times, you can have the best art in the whole wide world, but you can never compete with nature. And so the gardens around this house maybe are the most beautiful part. I don't know. And speaking of treasures, every house and every project that we do is done by a whole group of people. And even though, there's some focus or whatever on me, these people spent like years of their lives making that project perfect. And, one person is great at managing, one person's great at sort of certain technical things, another, has an artistic flair. But architecture is about a group of people getting together to make things happen. It starts with the client, then I play a role, and then this group comes together to make it happen. So there's a richness about the process that is very, very important. And I think most people don't realize that. We have a large office, something like, 80 or 90 people, and we form into little groups. And in the little groups, we're this intimate little family. And even as a big group, we also are a big family. We still do our crits every single Thursday. It's still engaging. Some are better than others. Some get really heated and crazy, especially when Matt Anderson has a bunch of ideas. And they take on all kinds of things. But in a sense, we collaborate with our clients and we collaborate with each other. And that's what we think makes our work better. It makes every time somebody weighs into it, it gets better. This is a very special house to me. It was done for some wonderful clients who are here tonight, and they wanted a house that was inspired by modern European architecture. And European architect, and not necessarily the Northwest. And there's a certain elegance and a certain attitude about the Europeans that is different. And so Catherine and I got on a plane, as we always do. We went to Berlin, and we saw Mies van der Rohe's museum there. We went to Switzerland. We saw the Byler. And we came back thinking that this should be a pavilion. And because it's on a sort of a flattish piece of property, and we wanted it to flow inside and outside. And so the house sort of opens itself up in a very simple way to the outside. And notice how the water helps the proportions get even more vertical, how nature frames the architecture, and then architecture frames the art. On the inside, there are actually a lot of very cozy spaces that are just little cozy things just crammed with art, like little nests. And then in the center of the house, there are these other places that are, I think of them more like the civic rooms or the public rooms. And they're more like the Palladian villas, where they're about a home as a grand statement. And so architecture, the architecture here is more monumental. In the center of the house is a gallery. On both sides, light is coming in from the outside of the house. Above this gallery is a skylight and clear-story windows. Under that is a fabric-stretched scrim that softens the light and lets it down into the gallery. And so we call this the House of Light, because in my mind, it's the best modulation of natural daylight that I have ever done. And to top that off, we got to work with the artists that probably influenced me the most in my whole life, James Turrell. So you turn the other way in this gallery and go through a 14-foot tall door, and that room was dedicated to a piece that James Turrell designed in that space. In the space, you go in, you turn on the music, pour a glass of wine, lie on the floor, and watch this incredible light show change, and it's reflected and projected light that just turns into magic as it goes. And so the idea of architecture, well, first of all, light being art, and architecture and environment being art are there. And then again, it's all going on outside in nature if we would only sit and watch. And here a couple asked me to do a farmhouse inspired by the local barns. And here the mural is basically this beautiful mountain range. And you can see the little farmhouse is inspired by the barn and how they work together. And in many ways, there's no greater luxury than living close to nature. And in contrast with that, lately I've done a lot of just small apartments in the city. Here, Julie Spidell in the lower part did a bronze sculpture that layers onto a translucent wall that layers onto the city outside. So art and the interior and the city outside all become one. A couple in Denver who have one of our country's great collections of decorative arts asked me to do a house for them. And because most of the decorative arts that they own can take lots of sunlight, we basically use natural light. And you can see in the cases in the background, natural light is actually lighting the objects. So they get this sort of wonderful glow through translucent glass to the objects. And one thing that I love to do, Charlie Fairchild in our office and I did the interiors for this house, and I love to design furniture because I think of furniture as basically just an extension of the architecture. And here I got to design some chairs, and Charlie, of course, worked with me. And in this case, you can see them all in the house, and we were in pretty nice company. Frank Lloyd Wright did the vase on the table in the foreground, and Matisse did the piece in the back over our little table. So it was kind of overwhelming to be in that company, but just a thrill. And it was great to work with something different than an art collection, but really a collection of decorative arts. One of my first clients asked me to do a new house for her down in Baja, California, and this is it. This is a very recent house. And it opens up completely to the ocean and this pool on one side. I just finished a house in Seattle for a couple who didn't have an art collection, but wanted to start a collection of Northwest art. And so we commissioned a number of artists to do pieces especially for them. Julie Spidell did this wonderful glass piece. Peter Millett did the sculpture in the lower corner. Joe McDonald, Catherine Skinner, a number of artists did just amazing pieces in that house. I just finished a house in Michigan, and it's a very tough house in this cold climate, raw concrete, very sort of rough wood. And they also wanted to start an art collection. So I encouraged them to collect African art because it's such a minimalist kind of thing, which is what they wanted. And the African art that they're just starting to collect really works beautifully with that kind of minimalist, sort of gutsy environment. Finally, after all these years, I got to do a museum all my own, or all our own. And it was a competition, an international competition that we won. And our idea was to do a building that, it's in Bellingham, Washington, captured light, which is very rare in Western Washington, and also created a public gathering space for the community. And so we decided to do this big curved wall that bounced light into the gathering space, but filtered light into internal spaces in a way that wouldn't harm the art, but gave you this nice glow of daylight throughout the day. And you can see the agates. We wanted to warm up the light, so we added a little bit of color, like the agates, to the glass, translucent glass that's on both sides of this wall to give it sort of this warmish glow. And this also won, or was given LEED Silver, which is an environmental standard. And because the building is basically very green in many ways, this wall naturally ventilates, and the interior spaces, the circulation spaces, do not need air conditioning. So here we are on the outside, the public gathering space. You can see how the light is bouncing light back into the space where all the people are. On the inside, it does the same thing. It kind of glows like an agate. And I love it the most when you're there all by yourself because of just that sort of that soft thing, or maybe I just like to be by myself. But John Grotti did this installation in the first, in the opening of the museum, and he did these giant paper pieces. They represent a sea creature that eats carbon in the ocean. And they were just fabulous. But the idea of being able to have a space where you can do big, giant sculptures, and the idea of the ocean takes us to the ocean, where in Hawaii, some people who were in love with Bali asked me to do a house for them. They love the Balinese temples and the many almond resorts in Bali. So Catherine and I, once again, hopped on an airplane, went to Bali, and it was hard work, but we went to all the resorts and noticed the reflecting pools and all that, and did this house that basically opens up to outdoors like only in Hawaii you can do. Showed their collection of Southeast Asian sculpture. And from the outside of the house, when you enter, you can look all the way through the entrance to the ocean. When you go into the entrance, you look back and you see nature framed as though it's an art piece. You look the other way, and you see the vista to the ocean lined by sculptures from Southeast Asia. And the vista is basically looking west across the ocean to Asia, where those sculptures came from. And a reflecting pool sort of gives us the last jump off to Asia. We're now in Hong Kong, and this is a house that was inspired by ancient Chinese architecture. And here we have a living room that frames a little island, much like my parents used to like to frame Mount Rainier from our living room. We commissioned Deborah Butterfield to do a horse inspired by the ancient Chinese horses. And Marianne Peters, who had done several murals for us before, did this heroic mural. It's about 300 feet long. And she went to Hong Kong numerous times and painted a mural on the wall. In my mind, it was inspired by the ancient Chinese scrolls and screens and how they sort of have this atmospheric quality. The way it ended up, it also has kind of a sense of Monet's water lilies, where you stand there and look at it and you are sort of, you feel like you could walk right into it, into this sort of surreal world. But Marianne became part of the community on the construction site, got to know all the Chinese workers, built this whole life experience into creating this art piece, which I think is one of the treasures of Hong Kong at this point. It's amazing. And Marianne did the small little mural in the little red building in the exhibit that you can see, so you can actually sit in that room and get a little bit of a sense of what this might feel like. I got to design some furniture. Again, Charlie Fairchild and I worked on the interiors together, based on the Chinese hat chair. And on the outside, the stone relates to the stone in the hills. The pool reflects the sky. And from this house, we got a lot of new commissions in Asia. And so my career has kind of moved to Asia, at least partly. Here I am in Taiwan, up in the hills around Taipei, talking to a client about a new project that's going to be there. We have these wonderful meetings with all these people that come, the clients and every consultant that you can think of. And we all sit around and talk. But then dinner and lunch are even more important. The social aspect is very important. And I think becoming friends with people that you work with is important. And I have to say that, like, I feel like my clients are part of my family, and I have this sort of lifelong friendship with most of them. But the Asians really work at that, and I think it's wonderful. Here we are in Mexico on a project that we're just starting to do, a hotel on the Sea of Cortez. And it's very similar. I just love these experiences of working with people in other countries. And so my little pond in South Puget Sound has now become the Pacific Ocean. And sort of while that's happening, Tom, Mr. Whirlwind, has sort of taken over the Atlantic Ocean and most of North America and Canada. But it's really fun because I think what's going on is, because of the internet, you're much closer to people in other places, and we're just having the best time doing that. But for me, while the world is getting smaller and the world in some ways is becoming our neighborhood, for me, the balance of that is my little bay back in Puget Sound. And so I'm kind of drawn, and I know Catherine is too, to spending more time there and getting over jet lag, for one thing, but going back to our little cabin and being in the woods and being part of nature and being part of a place that I know so intimately. And sitting in this room with the magic window that looks like it's not there, so you feel like you're outside. And proof of that is that Louis, our dog, stands at that window for hours on end, waiting for something to happen, the fox. And the fox comes by, stays for about 30 seconds, and then leaves. And Louis is finally satisfied. And Mount Rainier, of course, does the same thing, as anybody from Western Washington knows. We wait for it, and then it appears, and then it's gone. But these things are so important, and memory and going back to your childhood while you're learning new things is really important. You kind of go in both directions at once. Our cabin is all about a place for our family to come, and we try to get together there as much as possible. 2 of these people are here tonight. And just like my grandparents did 100 years ago this year. Actually, 2 nights ago was my mother's 100th birthday, and she's in this little picture. I thought it was kind of special. But most of the time it's Catherine and I there, and we just sort of treat it like a study hall. Catherine has all kinds of things she's doing, and I'm always working on my projects, and there's always a dog there. And, I sit there, and most of the projects that you see over in that exhibit were actually born out of my wheelbarrow, sitting on the beach, kind of doing whatever it is I do, and then going back to the office and bouncing it off people, changing it after that. So in the winter, I sit inside of our little house, and it's kind of like a health spa, too, because we go there when, we're tired, we come back from somewhere, and we get in the bathtub and look outside and look up into the trees. There's like a 12-foot tall window there. So you have this sense of renewal, and you go through 50 years of layers of architecture into our little bedroom, lie down on your back, look up, and you see the sky, and you might see a hummingbird, an eagle, or whatever go by. And at night, you see the stars. And I think of the stars like pebbles on the beach. I think someday we'll realize that it's just another scale of kind of a similar thing, depending on how you look at it. But to me, the stars at night are about endless possibilities, and that's what architecture and life are all about. So thank you very much.